going on, guys? Today I want to shoot out a couple 8-weights that I think can demonstrate what you get with different reputable brands versus newer brands versus high and low cost. So let's get started. Before we get started, please check out the apparel lines. We've got some really cool stuff out, some hats, some really cool different apparel tops like hoodies and shirts, stickers, okay? Links below, but check it out. It'll really help the channel. Okay, so what I have to shoot out today, we have the Sage Largemouth in like an 8-weight-ish class, and that's going to represent our upper end rod, if you will. I know it's a little older, but we have the Outlaw Rod Company 8-weight rod, and we have the Moonshine Casper, which is I think a newer rod that they came out with. Let's take a look at the tubes first. First of all, Sage, they offer you a rod tube that has obviously the reel attach style, if you will, whereas the other two are just Cordura tubes. Okay, if you give them all a squeeze, the Sage is definitely the hardest, and then that's not saying much, you know. The other two, the Moonshine is probably the second hardest, and the Outlaw is the third hardest. Just maybe that helps with protection. I don't know. All right, both the Outlaw and the Sage, neither of them come with a rod sock. Okay, that's neither here nor there, but the Moonshine does, and the reason that the other two don't is because their rod tube styles are the ones that have the different slotting that you can just go right in and open it up. The Moonshine, however, does not. It is a traditional, I guess if you will, with a sock. Some people like the sock, some people don't. This is neither here nor there. I prefer no sock, but that's okay. Interestingly enough, too, the Moonshine does come with 2 tips. That can help some, but there are many times where I've heard people breaking their rods not at the tip, but all 3 come with lifetime warranty. I believe for original owners, but nonetheless, here we go. Here are your 3 rods. Get your Outlaw Wanted Edition, 8-weight, 9-foot, Moonshine Casper, 8-weight, 9-foot, and then you get your Sage Bass. This is actually a 7-11, so it's a shorter rod, but I'm looking at fit and finish here, and you know what you get for that rod. And I believe it is a it's a 330 grain, not the 220, not the 250. Okay, so right off the bat, 3 very different corks. Sage looks to be a really nice, very tight fit. Moonshine has more cracking in it than the Outlaw, and I used the Outlaw more than the Moonshine. But these two look to be about the equivalent cork. That's the Outlaw and the Moonshine. The Sage has a very different fighting butt than the other two. All 3 have different fighting butt. However, if you look at the Sage, it definitely has the most dense of the 3, followed by the Outlaw, then the Moonshine. These 2 have just what look to be anodized reel seats. The Moonshine has like a little lightning bolt there. The Sage is pretty plain Jane. I do appreciate how the reel seat cannot spin around itself, which is nice. It helps anchor down. Where the other 2, the ferrule, if you will, to hold the cleat in, both spin. The Outlaw is not a salt-specific rod, but it has like a little wood burl. If you spray all these down, they should all perform just as well. All are full Wells grips. The Sage is the thinnest, but it is also more like the Moonshine in its shape, where the middle bulge is closer down towards the front of the rod, or the tip of the rod, and the Outlaw is a traditional looking 50-50 breakup. I didn't notice much of a difference when fishing them, quite honestly, because my thumb just finds the groove wherever it is anyway. And I fished this for a full day, fished this for a morning, and I fished this quite a bit. Not this particular rod, but this variety. I had 2 of them. Fit and finish, the Sage is a thinner looking finish, like epoxy on it or resin, whereas the other two are fairly thick looking. The Moonshine has what looks to be more of a fancified, if you will, wrapping, but I still see individual wraps that have missed. But that's to be kind of expected on a mass-produced rod of this, not mass-produced, but a rod of this price point. And the Outlaw Wanted is just straight black. Both have very similar, I would go as far as to say they are comparable in their blanks. The Outlaw hair narrower, I would say they might be equivalent blanks. Okay? Let's take a look at some of the first guides here, or the stripping guides. So the Moonshine has alignment dots, which is really nice. The Outlaw does not. And the Sage, let me pull that out. The Sage does not either. The Sage is a translucent finish. The stripping guides on the Sage look to be a little, they're different styles, so I can't compare those, and both will do just fine. They're a slightly narrower diameter, but fit and finish on both are just fine. You can tell that the Sage was hand wrapped, and I'm assuming this was too on the Moonshine. The Outlaw and the Moonshine look to have equivalent quality parts to them. Maybe slightly different, but I didn't notice any difference fishing the two. Interestingly enough, the different rods between the Outlaw and the Moonshine have different guide placings. So I don't know what that means, but I would go as far as to say they're both, fishing, the Sage is the stiffest. Shorter rod has to be a little stiffer to be able to handle 330 grain line. Definitely meant to get in and out and punch streamers and big hair bugs and things. The other two are just good general purpose rods. They're about the same price, I think, but I have to say the Outlaw is a little softer. Not soft as like you fish a 6-weight or something like that, but soft in that I loaded that rod better than the 8-weight. The 8-weight, I guess, if you wanted to fish long distance, maybe in the salt, to load the rod with a little longer of a cast might be beneficial, but for ponds and rivers for bass and things, I liked the Outlaw. It's much, I would say much lighter, but it is slightly lighter. I have to say that maybe the Sage is the heaviest, but it's all in this end. I don't know if that's to count because it's a short rod. They want to be able to the fulcrum for that castable point to be different. But when I cast them against each other with an 8-weight intermediate line, this loaded very similarly to the Moonshine. So I almost would go a line heavier. Granted, 330 grains gives you specifically how many grains they want you to cast the rod with. So obviously do that. This is just bringing the Sage in here was kind of a moot point because it's a very specific rod. These two general purpose 8-weights, I think they're indistinguishable as far as your fishability. I would fish the Outlaw at a closer distance, a little more technically. I also think that if you look at their 6-weight, it's a really cool banded rod. And then Moonshine has some really cool looking rods as well. But as far as performance goes, because that's what we all really care about, I would say they're very similar in performance, in quality. There are great rods for a little bit more. These are good. I know that they have a large following on social media, and that's because they offer quite a few varieties of unique looking rods to anglers who would assume that has to be a custom build. But you can't go wrong with either. Now, I received both of these for free, just so you're aware, so I did not pay the cost, but I'll put the prices on the screen if I remember. And both lifetime warranties. So it's up to you. If you have any experience with either, most people have that experience or have heard of Moonshine, but these guys, Outlaw, are fairly new to the game. They were kind enough to send a rod for me to fish my bass episode of the season, Pursuit Within Reach, with, and Moonshine sent this rod for a salt episode that I still have to film. I got out a little bit, but with the hurricane season, I wasn't able to get out there. I fished everything with with both an 8-weight floating and 8-weight intermediate, and like I said, I was a little more accurate with the Outlaw at closer distances, and the Vesper was able to punch in the wind maybe a little bit better, but just different applications, different parts of the Swiss Army knife. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, check out the other videos in the playlist, check out the series because you'll see these rods in action. Okay, check out my channel. But until next time, guys, catch you guys on the flip side. Tight lines.